Linda Watson stood at the window of her modest, weathered home in suburban Chicago, watching golden maple leaves swirl in the crisp autumn breeze. At 78, she had celebrated yet another birthday, alone. Her husband Robert had passed away more than a decade ago, and her children, now grown, had drifted far away. Her son, Robert Jr., was in Los Angeles, building a career in film production. Her daughter, Susan, lived in Austin, pursuing a graduate degree in education. Neither had bothered to visit in years. The living room was cluttered with framed photographs from happier days, Linda in her pristine white wedding gown, Robert proudly cradling their newborn son, and Susan's bright smile on her high school graduation night. Those images felt like relics of an irretrievable past. That evening, as she prepared dinner, a simple plate of macaroni and cheese and steamed green beans, Linda felt a hollow ache in her stomach. She lifted the landline receiver to call Susan, but the screen blinked no service. She sighed, pressing her knuckles against her temples. Silence. She sank into a chair, clutching a yellowed photograph of her 3 smiling selves, mother, wife, and daughter. The memory of laughter and warmth, the Sunday apple pies with cinnamon-scented dough, family picnics in Grant Park, bedtime stories read by the fireplace, felt painfully distant now. The small kitchen clock ticked loudly. Robert Jr.'s voice still echoed in her mind. "Mom, I've got a production meeting. I'll come next month." And Susan's promise, "I'll be there for Christmas." Neither promise materialized. Instead came excuses. "Mom, I'm swamped with final exams," or "I can't afford the airfare right now." Each word landed like a blow. Tears blurred Linda's vision as she thought, how can they forget me so easily? As dusk settled, the pale glow of streetlights illuminated her kitchen floor. Linda's eyes drifted to the stack of unopened letters on the counter. Holidays, birthdays, random postcards from friends she never wrote back. She felt a surge of something cold and resolute. If her own children would not stand by her, then they did not deserve to inherit anything she had left. Tomorrow, she decided, she would visit the attorney. She would ensure that Robert Jr. and Susan would find no easier path to her modest home or her bank account. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the chilly air, but from the steely determination forging itself in her heart. She set aside the photograph, took a deep breath, and whispered to her reflection in the window glass, "I will not be discarded." Before dawn the next morning, Linda rose with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She dressed in a simple button-down blouse and worn slacks, her arthritic joints protesting every movement. She packed a small folder with essential documents, birth certificate, marriage license, property deed, bank statements, and stepped into the crisp air. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Each footstep toward Robertson and Associates, in an old brick building on Michigan Avenue, felt heavier than the last, yet she knew what she must do. Inside the office, the mahogany-paneled walls and leather chairs smelled of polished wood and aged paper. Attorney Robert Henderson, impeccably dressed in a navy suit with silver hair at the temples, rose to greet her. He guided Linda to a seat by a large oak desk strewn with legal pads. "Ms. Watson, how may I assist you today?" he asked kindly. Linda's throat tightened. She opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten note. "I wish to disinherit my children, Robert Jr. and Susan, and redirect my estate to close friends and a charitable organization." She placed the note on the desk, her fingertips trembling. "My son and daughter have abandoned me," she said quietly. "They've given me nothing but excuses for years. I want them removed from my will entirely." Robert examined her with sympathetic eyes. "Are you certain, Ms. Watson? Disinheriting children is a significant step. There may be implications you should consider." Linda inhaled, recalling lonely nights by the television, hearing the click of the phone as she waited for a call that never came. "I've considered everything," she replied steadily. They had their chances. Over the next hour, Robert guided her through the legal process. Linda redirected her modest house, an aging 2-bedroom cottage with creaky floorboards, to Serenity Haven, a local nonprofit dedicated to housing and caring for homeless seniors. Her savings were to go to her lifelong friend Marta Reynolds, who had supported Linda through countless lonely nights. The children's names were erased and replaced with beneficiaries who had shown her genuine care: Marta and George Williams, a retired school teacher. When she signed the final document, Linda felt a complicated mixture of sorrow and relief. She had disowned her own flesh and blood, but in doing so, she reclaimed a measure of power over her destiny. As she exited the attorney's office, noon sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the historic building, and she stepped into a new reality, one where her children would inherit nothing but the memory of her absence. Back home that afternoon, Linda sank into her favorite armchair, a battered recliner upholstered in faded floral fabric. She opened a dusty photo album, its black pages stiff with age. The first picture showed a 20-year-old Linda standing beside her fiancé, Robert, on a farm in rural Iowa. The next image captured their tiny living room in 1968, with her cradling Robert Jr. in her arms and a month-old Susan sleeping peacefully in a crib. She turned the pages slowly, each photograph stirring memories of a life so vibrant at one time. She was born to sharecroppers, the eldest of 5 siblings. At 18, she moved to Chicago with her best friend, Marta, chasing dreams of a city life. There, she met Robert, a steelworker who loved her gentle spirit. They married in the church her grandmother had attended, promising to build a life full of love and laughter. Babies came, first Robert Jr., then Susan. Linda recollected recycled clothes, making do on a single factory income, and weekends picnicking by Lake Michigan. Life was challenging, but we were happy, she murmured to herself. As the years passed, both children excelled. Robert Jr. shone on the basketball courts, earning a scholarship at the University of Texas. Susan's passion for teaching and helping troubled youth took her to California. For a while, the Watsons journeyed across state lines for graduations, Linda in a polka dot dress, Robert's arm around her shoulder, tears in their eyes. But when Robert died unexpectedly of a heart attack when Linda was 65, the glue holding the family together cracked. After his death, Linda moved back to the Chicago suburbs, closer to the home they had shared. At first, she'd heard from the children, "Sorry, Mom, things are busy." But those visits dwindled to sparse phone calls, then vanished entirely. The day she realized that neither Robert Jr. nor Susan would come to collect her letters of condolence after the funeral, her heart began to harden. Now, holding a picture of her teenage daughter in a prom dress, Linda felt both pride and a sting of betrayal. Her son had once vowed, "Mom, I'll take care of you." And her daughter had whispered, "I'll always be your little girl." Yet promises faded, leaving only emptiness. Closing the album, Linda whispered to the silent house, "You've let me down, children. But some things are worth fighting for." Rising, she crossed to the curtained window, gazing at the branches of a maple tree swaying in the late afternoon wind. Somewhere beneath those leaves, she decided, lay her new purpose, to make sure her legacy served those who needed it, not those who deserted her. A week later, crisp autumn air invaded the kitchen as Linda reached for the mail on the front porch. She found a sealed envelope with a familiar scrawl, Robert Jr.'s handwriting. Her fingers shook as she slit it open. Inside, a typed letter read, "Dear Mom, I have received your directive regarding the will. I'm sorry you feel I have neglected you. The reality is, I'm swamped in Los Angeles managing film sets and a young family. Traveling to Chicago is costly, and I hope you understand. I promise to send money by the end of the month. Love, Robert." Her chest tightened. Money. That was all he wanted. Funds from an inheritance he assumed would still be there. Linda set the letter down, her mind flashing back to years of emptiness. Minutes later, an email pinged on the laptop from Susan. "Mom, Tom and I are expecting a baby this spring. Between my coursework, Tom's doctoral research, and saving for childcare, I simply can't visit Illinois. Please know that I love you. Love, Susan." Anger flared in Linda's throat. She sank onto her worn sofa, pressing her head into her hands. She recalled every holiday uncelebrated, every birthday passed with only a card never arriving, every voicemail she never received. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she crumpled the letter and closed her laptop, muttering, "No more." As twilight descended, Linda retrieved her laptop and typed a curt email to Attorney Henderson. Please finalize the will immediately. No further changes. My mind is made up. She clicked send with quivering determination. In that moment, the grief she felt, once soft and mournful, transmuted into icy resolve. If her children had forgotten her, she would reclaim power by rewriting her story, ensuring they would receive nothing from her estate. That night, Linda prepared a modest dinner, vegetable soup, and a slice of cornbread. As she ate in the dim glow of a single lamp, she gazed at an old family portrait on the wall. The faces looked like strangers, smiling, hopeful, loving. She thought, that family is gone. I must protect what remains of me. And so, under the flickering light, Linda felt the first embers of a plan that would change the course of her final years. Several days after signing the final documents, Linda sat on her front porch as dusk bled into night, wrapped in a knitted shawl her late husband once wore. The steady hum of traffic on nearby Belmont Avenue contrasted with her pounding heart. Memories of childhood in Iowa flooded her mind. Picking corn at dawn with her parents, racing homemade go-karts down dirt roads with Marta, dreaming of life beyond the fields. Those simple joys seemed a lifetime ago. Her neighbors, Marta Reynolds and George Williams, had become her chosen family. Marta, a retired nurse with a tender heart, had moved in next door after Robert's death. George, a former elementary school teacher, visited every Thursday with a batch of vegetable soup he'd simmered all morning. They were dependable when her biological children were not. She recalled Marta's gentle hands comforting her during nights of fever, and George's storytelling that made her cramped living room feel like a literary salon. One crisp afternoon, Jake Thompson, the neighbor from 2 houses down, approached Linda's porch carrying a folded newspaper. He tipped his cap and handed it over. On the front page was a photo of an elderly woman sleeping on a park bench downtown. Her children had sold her home and left her destitute. The headline read, "Homeless, Abandoned, Forgotten, Chicago's Senior Crisis." Linda stared at the image, the same frail vulnerability she sometimes glimpsed in her own reflection. That evening, Linda attended a meeting at Serenity Haven, the nonprofit she had chosen in her will. The building was a converted brownstone with a small garden courtyard. Inside, she listened as volunteers discussed upcoming fundraisers and resources for displaced seniors. She met Eleanor Smith, a stoic woman who had served as a WAVE, women accepted for volunteer emergency service in World War II, now forced to live in the shelter when her estranged children sold her house. Eleanor's stories of naval convoys and distant shores reminded Linda that human connection transcended blood. Walking home under the glow of street lamps, Linda felt a strange peace. Her grief, once suffocating, had been replaced by a purpose: to ensure that no senior would be left to wander city streets alone. In those allies, Marta, George, Jake, and the residents of Serenity Haven, Linda discovered a new family. She whispered to the open night, "For them, I will fight." The leaves rustled as if in agreement. 6 weeks after the will was finalized, Linda's phone rang mid-morning. The screen read unknown number. Her heart fluttered with apprehension as she answered. "Hello?" "Mom," came a voice that crackled with emotion. Susan's. I read your will. How could you leave me nothing? You're my mother." Linda sat up straight, the silence stretching between them. In the background, the faint hum of traffic and perhaps Susan's husband Tom moving around a kitchen. "Susan," she said slowly, "you knew I was alone. You knew I struggled with my health. You never called, never visited, never sent a check, not even a holiday card." Her voice trembled, torn between sorrow and simmering resentment. Tears slipped down Susan's cheeks. "Mom, I'm so ashamed. I was so caught up with grad school, planning for the baby, Tom's dissertation. I thought since you were still alive, it meant you were okay." Linda's throat burned as memories of empty birthday tables and silent Christmas mornings flooded her. "So you decided to pretend I was fine." "But I was dying inside, Susan." She closed her eyes, fighting to steady her voice. "If you wanted to be part of my life, you should have been there when it mattered." Susan sobbed. "I love you, Mom." I never stopped loving you." Linda exhaled a ragged breath, recalling the hammering ache in her chest during sleepless nights. "Love doesn't fill an empty room or pick up a phone. Actions speak louder than words. You gave me nothing but silence." She ended the call, her hand lingering on the receiver. In the lonely quiet that followed, she realized her anger had not faded. It had grown stronger, rooted in years of abandonment. Later that afternoon, she visited Serenity Haven. Eleanor Smith, leaning on her walker, greeted Linda with a gentle smile. "Your will has changed many lives, dear." Eleanor's eyes shone with gratitude. Linda felt something shift within her, a recognition that, despite her own pain, she had sown the seeds of compassion. In Eleanor's resilience, she saw reflected the woman she once was, strong, purposeful, and unbroken by hardship. As Chicago settled into the heat of summer, thunderstorms became frequent. One humid evening, lightning flashed across the pewter sky, and Linda lay in bed, unable to sleep. The phone rang. Her heart skipped. She recognized the ringtone she had assigned to Robert Jr., a snippet of an old jazz tune she used to play when he was a boy. "Mom," his voice sounded distant, strained. I'm sorry." Linda's breath caught. She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "It's been 6 years, Robert. I've heard your promises before." His voice trembled. "I'm in trouble, Mom. My production company is collapsing, and my wife and kids are struggling. I thought you could help." Memories of his childhood resurfaced. How he used to dance around the living room singing "When You Wish Upon a Star," how she had stayed up all night nursing him through fever. But all those years in between collapsed into moments of silence. She felt the old anger ignite. "You want money?" she asked softly. Robert hesitated. I'd hoped you'd be there if I needed you." Linda's voice went cold. "I'm not a bank. I'm not a fallback." She hung up without waiting for his response. The next morning, she drove to Serenity Haven, determined to channel her complex emotions into something meaningful. Inside, she found Eleanor Smith at the garden courtyard, tending to a small rose bush with wrinkled hands. Eleanor's face lit up when she saw Linda. "You're a lifesaver," Eleanor said. "We never knew how we'd make it through winter." Linda knelt beside her, touching the delicate petals. "I just did what was right," she replied. In Eleanor's calm presence, Linda felt her anger slowly transform into resolve. She would continue dedicating her time and resources to those who truly needed her, rather than her own children's capricious desires. By late summer, the nonprofit prepared for an annual harvest festival to raise awareness and funds. The converted brownstone bustled with volunteers decorating tables in autumn hues, orange tablecloths, decorative pumpkins, and mason jars filled with fairy lights. Linda arrived shortly before dusk, carrying a large basket of homemade cornbread muffins and a bouquet of sunflowers she had picked from a neighbor's garden. Inside the hushed sanctuary, a former Navy pilot, Captain Marcus Bell, shared memories of steaming across the Atlantic during the World War II. His gravelly voice resonated with pride and sorrow as he recounted battles fought and comrades lost. The audience, mostly elderly men and women, listened raptly, some wiping tears from their eyes. Linda felt a lump in her throat, remembering stories her own father told about the war. After capturing everyone's attention, Marta Reynolds, now a volunteer nurse, took the microphone. She described how Linda's donation would fund renovations to add private rooms for seniors who had no one to advocate for their dignity. A round of applause echoed through the hall. Tears sprang to Linda's eyes as she realized that, despite her personal heartbreak, her actions were tangible beacons of hope. At the refreshment table, George Williams poured cups of spiced apple cider, while Jenna, a young volunteer, handed out plates of Linda's muffins. Guests chatted softly about the coming fall, sharing memories of their own children and the families that once were. Linda listened to their gratitude, feeling a warmth in her chest that rivaled any maternal connection. She understood that while her children had deserted her, she had found purpose in helping others who were also forgotten. When the clock struck 9, Linda stepped onto the back porch. The night air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth. She looked at her empty phone, realizing neither of her children had tried to reach her this evening. Yet, in the soft laughter and comforting conversations inside, she sensed a deeper bond, A family not bound by blood but by shared compassion. She made a silent vow. She would continue to nurture that bond, no matter what her own children chose. Late September brought crisp mornings and an amber haze to Chicago. The nonprofit's administrative office, in a renovated townhouse near Lincoln Park, had become a second home for Linda. One morning she entered to find Susan waiting in the small lobby, clutching a canvas tote bag and looking anxious. The reappearance of her daughter stirred a mixture of hope and dread within Linda's heart. "Mom," Susan said softly, avoiding eye contact. She cleared her throat, then lifted her gaze. I wanted to know. I found out you redirected everything to Serenity Haven. Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry." Linda studied her daughter's worn cardigan and faded jeans, far from the polished suits she had once envisioned for her. She recalled the little girl who used to weave flower crowns in their backyard, the teenager who borrowed her books and stayed up late discussing Shakespeare. Now Susan looked like a weary stranger. "Why are you here, Susan?" Linda asked, her tone cautious. "If you're here to ask for forgiveness, I don't know if I can give it." Susan's eyes filled with tears. "I sold my house in Austin," she admitted. "Tom and I couldn't afford it without help, so I left. I couldn't stop thinking about you, Mom. I moved into a small apartment downtown. I want to be close, to make amends." An ache lodged in Linda's chest. She was tempted to fling open her arms, to embrace her daughter with the fierce love of a mother who had waited decades, but years of silence and broken promises had built a wall too high. "You understand why I did what I did?" she asked. Her voice softened despite herself. Susan nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know I was selfish. I thought you had everything you needed. Now I realize I was wrong." For a moment, mother and daughter locked eyes in painful vulnerability. Outside, a flock of sparrows darted in the courtyard, their chirps punctuating the silence. Linda swallowed hard, feeling nostrils sting with unshed tears. "I appreciate your honesty," she said finally, "but you cannot undo the past." Susan choked out a sob. "I love you, Mom." Linda felt her own eyes blur. She reached out and took Susan's hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you too," she whispered. "But love alone does not fill an empty room. You must show me day by day that you mean to stay." As December descended upon Chicago, the city transformed into a winter wonderland. Frost etched intricate patterns on windows, and the first snowfall settled like powdered sugar on rooftops. At home, Linda's small living room glowed from strings of white lights draped around the bookshelves. She sat on her well-worn love seat, wrapped in her grandmother's hand-knitted shawl, with a mug of hot apple cider warming her palms. The aroma of cinnamon and cloves drifted through the air, mingling with a faint scent of pine from the artificial tree in the corner. She picked up her tattered journal, a gift from friend Betty Martin a decade ago, and flipped to a fresh page. With deliberate strokes, she wrote, "I have spent weeks wrestling with forgiveness." Susan stands before me now, repentant and fragile. I cannot deny the relief in my chest when I hear her voice. Yet the wound remains. I am torn between craving her presence and fearing another betrayal. Perhaps time is the only balm. A sudden gust rattled the window panes as the wind howled across the rooftops. Linda set down her pen and stared into the dancing lamplight. The silence within her house felt both comforting and lonely. No echoes of footsteps, no laughter drifting from a children's room. She remembered how Christmas used to fill this space. Shimmering tinsel, wrapped gifts piled under the tree, Robert Jr. and Susan arguing over which ornament to hang next. Now only echoes remained. Her phone lit up with a text from Susan. "Mom, I baked gingerbread cookies. Can I bring them over? I want to spend Christmas Eve with you." For a moment, Linda's heart fluttered. She rose and walked to the window, peering out at the swirling snow. She thought of children's faces lighting up at holiday magic, of traditions she and Robert had begun, caroling at their church, driving past neighborhood light displays. Could she open her door again? She placed a hand over her heart, feeling the familiar pain of abandonment. Then slowly she tapped a reply. "Of course, dear. Come at 6. I'll have cocoa ready." She exhaled, knowing she was stepping into uncertain territory. But as snowflakes settled on the windowsill, Linda felt a faint glimmer of warmth, a fragile ember of hope. After Susan's visit on Christmas Eve, where they sipped cocoa and nibbled gingerbread in companionable silence, Linda resolved to address a nagging worry that had grown over the past year. Her shortness of breath had worsened, and occasional chest pains left her lightheaded. Despite her stubborn nature, she scheduled an appointment with her cardiologist, Dr. Patel, at Mercy Medical Center. The halls smelled of antiseptic and latex, echoing with the distant hum of monitors and muted conversations. Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken man in his 40s, found her blood pressure dangerously high and ordered a battery of tests: an echocardiogram, stress test, and blood work. "Your heart is like a delicate clock," he said gently. "Stress can cause the gears to seize. You need to rest more and reduce tension." Linda forced a weak smile. "I'm trying, Doc. My mind's busier than ever." He tapped her chart. "Be careful. If you continue to ignore these warning signs, you risk more than just discomfort." 2 nights later, a pounding headache jolted Linda awake. She felt dizzy and nauseous, and the room spun. Clutching her chest, she realized her heart was racing. Frantically, she pressed the nurse call button. Moments later, paramedics arrived, carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and muffled voices. Through the haze, she recalled Susan's gentle hands on hers, Marta's worried eyes, George's promise to look after the house. At Mercy's cardiac ICU, the beeping monitors and sterile white walls felt alien. Linda lay in a hospital bed, sensations dulled by medication. A nurse checked her vitals, then offered a reassuring squeeze to her hand. She scanned the room: empty chairs, folded blankets, a small vase of artificial flowers perched by the window. For the first time, Linda felt truly helpless. Her body, once strong enough to endure decades of loss, had suddenly betrayed her. When Dr. Patel appeared, his expression was grave but compassionate. "You had a mild heart attack," he explained. "We're stabilizing you with medication, but you need rest. No more stress, Linda." Through blurred vision, Linda noticed a flutter of white outside the window, snow returning for a final visit. In that moment, she realized her own vulnerability. Not only was her heart fragile, but time was slipping through her fingers. The complexity of her relationships, the simmering wounds, and the hope of reconciliation all seemed to hinge on how many beats her heart had left. Linda awoke to the soft glow of fluorescent lights reflecting off sterile walls. A nurse hovered nearby, adjusting her blankets. She felt groggy, every part of her body aching, as if she had aged 10 years overnight. Outside the window, pale winter light filtered through frost-laced panes, illuminating the quiet corridor beyond. She summoned enough strength to lift her arm and touch the phone on the bedside table, wanting to call Marta to hear a friendly voice. The line connected, but no one answered. Only mariachi music played from Susan's voicemail greeting. Linda pressed 0, and Susan's familiar voice crackled through. "Mom, I tried calling. I heard you were in the hospital. Please say you're okay." Tears stung Linda's eyes as she whispered, "I'm alive, dear." Moments later, Dr. Patel entered, accompanied by a gentle-faced nurse. "Your heart attack wasn't severe, but you did cause damage," he said kindly. "You need to limit visitors, reduce your workload, and focus on recovery." A lump formed in Linda's throat. She recalled the years of loneliness and the fierce resolve that led her to disinherit her children. Now, lying in a hospital bed, she felt a pang of regret. Her body had endured so much, and the distance from her own children, the estrangement she had wrought in anger, seemed suddenly unbearable. That afternoon, Marta arrived, eyes red from worry. She burst into tears when she saw Linda, rushing to hold her hand. "I was so scared, dear," Marta sobbed. "I should have come sooner." Linda offered a small, tired smile. "We all have regrets," she whispered. Over the next few days, visitors came. Marta, George bearing home-cooked chicken soup, and even Susan, her face pale and drawn. Susan approached the bedside hesitantly, placing a trembling hand on her mother's arm. "Mom, I never meant for you to go through this alone. I'm here now." Linda gazed at her daughter, so much sorrow in her eyes, and felt her own heart both soften and ache. She realized that love and forgiveness, once off limits, were now as vital to her survival as any medication, but fear lingered. If she reopened the door too wide, would she be betrayed again? In the hush of that hospital room, amid the beep of monitors and hiss of oxygen, Linda confronted the truth that healing, both physical and emotional, was a fragile, uncertain process. When spring finally arrived, the hospital discharged Linda into the embrace of a world bursting with new life. Pale crocuses peeked through thawing lawns, and cherry blossoms drifted like pink snowflakes onto sidewalks. At home, Linda found her once empty living room warmed by sunlight and filled with vases of fresh tulips and writing desk littered with get-well cards. One morning, Marta knocked, pushing open the door to reveal Susan standing behind her, clutching a bouquet of lilies. The daughter's cheeks were flushed with hope and trepidation. "Mom, I want to help you get back on your feet," Susan said, placing the flowers on the coffee table. "I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Linda looked at her daughter's earnest face. She remembered reading Doctor. Seuss, to her in that very room, Susan's head nestled under her chin as she drifted to sleep. Yet now Susan was stumbling over words, as if she feared her mother would reject her all over again. "Tell me," Linda said quietly, "what changed?" Susan paused, wringing her hands. "When I got your letter disinheriting me, I felt like my heart had been punched. I thought, maybe she really didn't love me anymore." Her voice cracked. "So I sold my house and moved here. I took a job as an assistant teacher at the elementary school down the street. I want to pay my rent, my share of groceries. I want to be part of your life as best I can." Tears pooled in Linda's eyes. She walked over and gently took Susan's hand. "I'm proud of you for coming, but you must understand, my trust was broken. To rebuild it will take time." Susan swallowed hard, relief and remorse mingling in her expression. "I'll wait, Mom. I promise." That afternoon, they sat on the back porch, newly painted white, with a pitcher of iced tea between them. Linda described plans to volunteer at Serenity Haven again, helping with the garden club. Susan offered to drive her there weekly. As they spoke, a cardinal flitted around a nearby bird bath, its scarlet feathers brilliant against the emerald grass. The sight felt symbolic, hope in the form of a small, fiery bird. For the first time in many years, Linda allowed herself to envision a future where her daughter stood beside her. Yet she kept one hand on her chest, as if measuring the strength of her own fragile heart. She knew the path to reconciliation would be long, but as the evening sun warmed her shoulders, she allowed a single tentative bloom of optimism to take root. Late July brought a sweltering heat wave to Chicago. Sidewalks shimmered under the relentless sun, and the hum of air conditioners buzzed in every block. Despite her recent fragility, Linda agreed to meet Robert Jr. at a small 24-hour diner on a quiet corner of Belmont and Ridgeway. She arrived at dusk, the sky painted in pinks and purples, and seated herself in a red vinyl booth. The diner's neon sign flickered overhead. "Open all night." Moments later, Robert Jr. slid into the booth across from her, visibly thinner and older than she remembered. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his blue eyes looked haunted. He placed a worn photograph on the table, Linda standing beside teenage Robert, both grinning widely at a county fair. He cleared his throat, his voice thick with guilt. "Mom, I need to apologize." He stretched out his hand, but Linda did not take it. She watched him tuck the photo into his jacket pocket, as though fearful of losing it. Things collapsed. My production company went bankrupt, Tom left me, and my kids are bouncing between relatives. I have nowhere to go." Tears glimmered in his eyes. "I know I screwed up. I was selfish, building my own life without looking back. I never thought you'd really follow through with the will." Linda's throat tightened, memories rushing. The movie set phone calls that never happened, his absent voice on holidays. She remembered saying, "I hope you learned what it means to be forgotten." She took a steadying breath. "Robert, your suffering does not bring back the years you abandoned me." He bowed his head, shame etched on his face. "I know that now." He looked up, desperation shining in his eyes. "Mom, I want to make amends. If you'll let me, I'll move to Chicago, get a job, help pay bills, I'll volunteer at the shelter, anything. The weight of his words pressed on Linda's chest, an ache more painful than any physical discomfort. She studied him, the unshaven beard shadowing his jaw, the slump of his shoulders as if bearing the weight of his guilt. In that moment, she saw not just her son who had forsaken her, but a wounded man seeking redemption. Actions speak louder than words, she said quietly, recalling her own admonition to Susan. I want to believe you, Robert, but you'll have to show me. It won't be easy. He nodded vigorously, tears spilling down his cheeks. I understand, Mom. I will prove it. As he left the diner, stepping into the humid night, Linda watched his retreating figure. The streetlights cast long shadows. She felt a tender pulse of hope, if not for her own sake, then for the promise of who her children might become if given a chance. Yet she also felt the fragility of trust, as delicate as the porcelain cup she had held in her hand. Late July brought a sweltering heat wave to Chicago. Sidewalks shimmered under the relentless sun, and the hum of air conditioners buzzed in every block. Despite her recent fragility, Linda agreed to meet Robert Jr. at a small 24-hour diner on a quiet corner of Belmont and Ridgeway. She arrived at dusk, the sky painted in pinks and purples, and seated herself in a red vinyl booth. The diner's neon sign flickered overhead. Open all night. Moments later, Robert Jr. slid into the booth across from her, visibly thinner and older than she remembered. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his blue eyes looked haunted. He placed a worn photograph on the table, Linda standing beside teenage Robert, both grinning widely at a county fair. He cleared his throat, his voice thick with guilt. Mom, I need to apologize. He stretched out his hand, but Linda did not take it. She watched him tuck the photo into his jacket pocket, as though fearful of losing it. Things collapsed. My production company went bankrupt, Tom left me, and my kids are bouncing between relatives. I have nowhere to go. Tears glimmered in his eyes. I know I screwed up. I was selfish, building my own life without looking back. I never thought you'd really follow through with the will. Linda's throat tightened, memories rushing, the movie set phone calls that never happened, his absent voice on holidays. She remembered saying, I hope you learned what it means to be forgotten. She took a steadying breath. Robert, your suffering does not bring back the years you abandoned me. He bowed his head, shame etched on his face. I know that now. He looked up, desperation shining in his eyes. Mom, I want to make amends. If you'll let me, I'll move to Chicago, get a job, help pay bills. I'll volunteer at the shelter. Anything. The weight of his words pressed on Linda's chest, an ache more painful than any physical discomfort. She studied him, the unshaven beard shadowing his jaw, the slump of his shoulders, as if bearing the weight of his guilt. In that moment, she saw not just her son who had forsaken her, but a wounded man seeking redemption. Actions speak louder than words, she said quietly, recalling her own admonition to Susan. I want to believe you, Robert, but you'll have to show me. It won't be easy. He nodded vigorously, tears spilling down his cheeks. I understand, Mom. I will prove it. As he left the diner, stepping into the humid night, Linda watched his retreating figure. The streetlights cast long shadows. She felt a tender pulse of hope, if not for her own sake, then for the promise of who her children might become if given a chance. Yet she also felt the fragility of trust, as delicate as the porcelain cup she had held in her hand.